nature's coolest little things. Tardigrades are sometimes called water bears. Are it would be safe to call them microscopic, right?
Yeah.
They can grow up to a millimeter. I learned, so they're not like germ microscopic, but they're these microscopic creatures who are famed for their ability to survive in very extreme conditions. They can survive in the vacuum of space, apparently. Um, they can survive extreme pressures, and they're resistant to radiation. And they can also go more than 10 years without food or water by drying themselves out and entering sort of a dehydrated state of suspended animation. So today we have to talk about these creatures. We've got two panelists. We've got Richard or
Dick.
Would you introduce
Oh, sure.
yourself?
My name's Dick Hurley, and I'm a veterinarian. I don't treat tardigrades, but I do work. I've worked in the area of biomedical research for 3 decades or so, and tardigrades have always fascinated me, and this has kind of forced me to dig a little deeper into their physiology. But it is I think as we learn more about them, I think you will be incredibly amazed at what they've been able to do with their tiny little bodies. But we'll talk about that.
And then our other panelist is Renate.
Yes, my name is Renate Fiora, and I'm a physicist. So that's kind of how I got introduced in tardigrades. I think I'd heard about them, but I think I really got a good introduction to them in the Cosmos series with Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he talks about them. And we have a tardigrade plushie.
Yeah. Oh, and over our fourth panelist. Does he have a name? Does it have a name?
He doesn't. Maybe we can vote on a name for him later. Or is it a her? I don't know. See, it's incorrect because it only has 6 legs and tardigrades actually have 8. And they don't actually have eyes? Is that what we decided?
They have like little spots, but they don't have...
And these are really hard. Watch when I tap them against the microphone. It's going to be loud. Think geek. So go while the getting's hot because they're about to go away, right? So.
Well, so being such sort of weird beings, there are a lot of questions that I have about tardigrades, and I've polled a bunch of other people who had questions about them, and I just figured we could go over some of those. Like,
Sure.
Do you guys know do you know how they eat?
I don't know how they eat, but I do have information here on how they reproduce.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that. Was one of the questions.
I'm a physicist and not a biologist, so these are going to have words that I don't know. Normally they are dioecious, meaning that they have a female and a male version and reproduce sexually. But there are some species of tardigrades that are all female, and those do undergo parthenogenesis. And the females lay eggs which develop without the need of fertilization.
Nice.
Yeah.
We could even step back a little bit further as to where do they fit into life, into the classification of life, and it still hasn't been worked out. I mean, they're related to the arthropods in some ways, and to nematodes in other ways. Tardigrades are their own phylum. That's how unique they are. and there's about 1,200 species. So when you say tardigrade, it's not, you're not speaking about a particular species, and they're found everywhere from the Antarctic down to the ocean trenches, and they live in. This will be important as we talk about their resistance to different extremes, but they live in water environments, and so you have your aquatic tardigrades, but then you have ones that live on land, but they don't actually live on land. They live in water films that you'll find in mosses and vegetation and things like that. So they're always in water, but they actually live in land. And those guys are the ones that display a lot of the really extreme abilities to survive various insults because of the environment they live in. It's constantly drying up and getting wet, and they're constantly being exposed over. They've been around for hundreds of millions of years, and so it's amazing, but it's not surprising if you look at how they live, how they lived and developed over the years.
Yeah, on that topic, a couple of bits of information that I found as well. Tardigrades, their general lifespan's actually only a few months, but if they become desiccated, so completely lose, all moisture, they can be resuscitated basically 100 years later, and come back to life. And I know that they've done tests out in space where they've taken some of them, let them sit for half an hour or an hour or something like that out in the vacuum of space, brought them back in, and like 30% were still alive. So that's pretty impressive.
That's pretty good. So you bring up tardigrades in space. And I am aware of a government-funded research program called Tardigrades in Space, and the official sort of acronym code name of Tardigrades in Space is TARDIS. So we know the kind of people who put together that study.
So if you want to, so you ask the question, well, how, what's the big deal? They can survive in space.
Yeah, how do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that they're exposed to vacuum, number one, and then, but they have intense radiation in space because they're up above the atmosphere, and the atmosphere actually protects us from a lot of the radiation that normally would be lethal. And so they're up there and they can survive, but why do they have that ability? I mean, what was the selective pressure on Earth to allow them to live in space? And they don't put them out in space as when they're just normally walking around and metabolizing and living. They put them out as desiccated tongues. It's called TUN, and this is a survival mechanism that they developed in the environments that dry up, and they have to protect themselves until it gets wet again. And when they're in that state, they produce proteins that will protect the structure of their DNA, the structure of their other proteins, their enzymes and things like that are very critical to life. And what happens, as things dry out, if you have a glass of salt water and it starts to dry, well, things crystallize. And the same basic thing with proteins. As things get desiccated, the structure of the proteins can change as things get, and by changing, they become inactive a lot of times. But the tardigrade has evolved these protecting mechanisms that protect those proteins, and they also have an incredible DNA repair system that will actually repair the DNA as it gets knocked with the radiation. It gets strand breaks and things like that. These proteins that go around and repair the DNA. So that's, that's basically why they can survive in space, but it's still no less amazing.
On account of the DNA repair mechanism, I was reading. So this is kind of controversial because there are 2 or 3 studies about this subject that had different results. But a group of scientists, I don't remember where the first group was from, but they sequenced the tardigrade genome and came to the conclusion that 1/6, or like 17% of a tardigrade's genome is genes from other animals or other life forms. So oftentimes, so just about every living thing has some DNA that comes from viruses or comes from that's sort of junk DNA that's been inserted by something that was in the body, and they call that horizontal gene transfer. And the first group of scientists found that their tardigrades had, way more than any other life form on Earth in terms of horizontally transferred DNA. And they thought that maybe it had something to do with that when they desiccate and reactivate their DNA, because their DNA breaks down, they have to repair it, that they might accidentally stitch in genes from their environment into their DNA. And they also hypothesized that having the sort of would be somehow contribute to them having their sort of abilities. But then other researchers in Scotland and Japan ran the same experiments and found that they didn't actually have that much horizontally transferred DNA, that they only had like 2%. And so they suggested that maybe the first group just did the experiment wrong.
Maybe there was contamination.
Yeah,
but some of the genes that you were talking about, part of the proteins that are produced that protect uh, the animals when they dry up are originate from bacteria. So they are using some of those genes in there.
And something that the Japanese scientists who disproved the first study were doing with their study was they were looking at the way that they looked at analyzed the genome, found genes in there that coded for proteins that would protect from radiation, and then basically from what I got from the article, they like mushed the tardigrades up and then put dyes on the proteins to see how they behaved, and then they took actually some human cells and basically dipped them in the tardigrade juice, and those proteins became part of the human cells and imparted those radioactive, those anti-radioactive properties onto the human cells.
So you're saying, if I can interrupt for a moment, that there's a new Marvel hero called Tardigrade Man? Awesome.
I'd watch that.
I watched the hell out of that. Somewhere between the Tick and Spider-Man, I think. I kind of like some of the colloquial names that have been given to tardigrades. I mean, everyone pretty much knows them as water bears, right? And that was first given to them by, let me look at his name, Lazzaro Spallanzani in 1773, which is when they were first discovered. 1773.
So they were discovered like 300 years ago.
Yeah, 300 years ago, more than. But they're also sometimes referred to as it was moss piglets, which I'm like, oh, it's so cute, little moss piglets. But of course, the thing, we kind of talked a little bit about already what their special abilities. We've talked about their ability to live hundreds of years, or to survive hundreds of years while desiccated, to survive the vacuum and radiation of space. But also, they're found in just about every biome on Earth, including volcanoes and Antarctica and the deep. They're extremophiles. They live in places where we would not think life would be able to survive, and that's what they're really known for, I guess.
So a friend of mine that I was telling about this panel asked, "Are there tardigrades on me right now?" Because I'm pretty extreme. So, is it likely that they're like, are they ubiquitous enough, or is it, yeah?
I think so. I think they're probably, again, physicist, not biologist, but my hypothesis would be that they might almost be too big to live on us successfully.
Well, they need a film of water. So
I don't know, I know a lot of moist people out there.
might live in your mucous membranes.
Up your
talk
nose.
about that.
So be careful when you sneeze. You might be throwing away tardigrades. No, you're not.
Is it all right with you guys if we take some audience questions?
No, this is
right.
the fans.
I was just wondering, since they're extremophiles, do they generalize across species? Like if I grab a tardigrade from Scotland, can I put them in like a polar ice cap and they'll be okay? Can I take the polar ice cap guy and put them in the bottom of the ocean? Can they all go to space? Some of them.
Based on my reading, I would say no. There are some that are able to survive volcanoes, and there are some that are able to survive in Arctic conditions. So my guess is no. They're just really good at adapting to where they are,
Exactly.
and yeah.
How small did they go in that scene?
Yeah, I think it was on the way down.
I'd have to watch the scene in slow motion. So that's the only way to get to the bottom.
Yeah, we're talking like 0.1 to 1.5 millimeter range, so they're pretty small.
They're actually when they hatch, they're little versions of their adult cells. It's not larvae or anything like that, and they're born with a certain number of cells.
Yeah, I was.
And the cells don't multiply; they don't divide like they do in other organisms, but they just get bigger. So as they grow, the cells don't multiply; they just get bigger physically.
Yeah, and then all members of any particular tardigrade species have the same number of cells as each other.
And that's very similar to some nematodes. That the tardigrade.
What's a nematode?
Huh?
There was a question of what's a nematode.
What's a nematode? It's a roundworm.
What do you think a nematode is? No, sorry.
There are nematodes in SpongeBob.
C. elegans. If you've ever heard of C. elegans, that's a nematode. They're pretty ubiquitous in the soil and things like that. They're not really microscopic, but they're pretty small.
Tiny
some
worms.
are microscopic, and some are bigger.
We were talking about how old they are, and I'm stumbling across more interesting facts. So there's about 1,150 known species, and some of them include fossils dating from 530 million years ago in the Cambrian period. So they've definitely been around for longer than us, to say the least.
I was speculating. So since they have a finite countable numbers. First of all, they're small enough that the number of cells that they have in their bodies are pretty countable, which is how we know that they all have the same number because we counted. But since they all start off with the cells that they're going to have in their lives, and then they don't get new ones, they don't make new ones. The ones that they have just get bigger. Does that mean that if a tardigrade is injured, it doesn't regenerate, or?
Well, I think they've shown that some cells, like in the gut, that are again, they lose those cells.
Yeah.
Those cells will be replaced.
Okay.
So they don't, but they don't. Their cells don't. The cells numbers don't increase as they grow. But they
so
do
they're
have
like
the
replaced
ability,
on an as needed basis, kind of.
Yeah, I don't know about injuries, but certainly the gut, the lining of the gut, as those cells get sloughed off, just they do get replaced. But.
Cool. We have a question.
So because their cells don't divide and reproduce, are tardigrades immune to cancer?
Well,
Do they live long enough to even experience cancer?
right. I think since cancer is a loss of control of cell division, that they may or may not be immune to cancer, so to speak. And if they have mutations in those genes that are controlling that cell division, there's no reason why they can't have that switch turned back on. I'm just speculating.
But maybe.
Yeah.
So the answer is maybe.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'd count on tardigrade therapy anytime soon.
But their lifespan normally is only months at the most. They're not extremophiles. You think of extremophiles living in high salt environments or hot extreme environments. Tardigrades not so much. They don't live in extreme environments typically, but their environments aren't real stable, especially the ones that live on land, and that's why they've developed these survival mechanisms. So they can survive extremes, but they don't live and function and metabolize in really extreme environments. Typically, you have the ones in the Arctic, in the ocean depths.
Here's a question.
Okay.
Correct. So, right, because when they're surviving those extreme environments, they're in that cryptobiotic state. So they're not.
I'm gonna say I'm the one that called them extremophiles first, so I'm just gonna reiterate physicists, not biologists.
Well, they don't love the extremes. They just tolerate them.
They're very tolerant.
I just came from Arizona. I didn't love it there, but I tolerated it. I was in Phoenix.
They respire through the skin. I mean, they're only about 1,000 cells, so they can respire directly through the skin. They have a digestive tract. They feed. We're talking about that. They have a little. If you notice their mouth, it's just like a little circular thing, but they have a stylet. You could describe it as that will evert and puncture cells of
Like a flerken?
eukaryotes or moths or plants, and they'll damage the cells, and then they just suck the juices of the cells as they empty out, and that goes in. So they have a little pharynx, muscular pharynx that will suck the thing in, and then it passes through the intestinal tract, and they actually will excrete it. So they have a tube within a tube type of. Yes, there is.
Hey, everyone poops. Just remember that.
And then they have the gonads, so they produce eggs and sperm. Muscles, nerves. They have it's a ganglion in the anterior part that'd be a brain, and then they have a ventral nervous system as opposed to dorsal like we have, but it runs down and then controls the legs. So they have muscle tissue and nervous tissue. Some of them have cuticle surrounding, for protection around their bodies. So they have a little bit of everything. No real brain. It's more ganglion. It's an accumulation of a handful of cells that kind of coordinate things, but I don't think they're thinking much.
Like a lot of.
Like most of us come late Saturday night and Convergence weekend.
Yeah.
Just a handful of cells.
Can they be trained at all to
So, like a tardigrade circus.
Yeah, if you have a flea circus, maybe you could have a tardigrade.
what kind of complexity is the brain a lot?
Well, obviously, it can direct the tardigrade to go towards something or away from something. Now, what those stimuli are, I don't know. And you know, you can teach a planaria, which is a flatworm, not a roundworm like a deep. You can teach a planarian to do a simple Y maze. So I'm sure a tardigrade, you could, with the proper incentive and rewards, you could probably get them to go forwards and backwards, but you know, they
Challenge accepted.
they're like sheep. They don't have a lot of repertoire. They run and they don't.
So we need a tardigrade dog? Is that what you're saying?
Actually, do you want to talk about your sheep at all?
Huh? My sheep. I got 400 of them at home, so when I talk sheep, we have sheep.
Tardigrades?
Charlie, you had a question?
I just want to acknowledge that the studies you cited indicate that some more graduate students had to spend hundreds of hours in a microscope painstakingly counting the numbers.
Cell. Yeah.
Not once, but multiple.
Well, they've actually done micro CT scans on it. I mean, this is, but they you know, because of their abilities, I mean, they're being used more and more commonly, more and more often now as animal models to study how you know, we might survive in space. We might be able to, you know, the whole thing with the cell division and thing. You know, if we could understand how they can control their survival, it could eventually help us to do the same thing.
On the subject of tardigrades in space, I'd just like to get your guys' thoughts on this. There's a lot of people like to think about tardigrades as possible evidence for the panspermia hypothesis.
Everyone know what the panspermia hypothesis is? It's the idea that life on planets on Earth was seeded from elsewhere in the universe.
Yeah, maybe it came here on a comet. Maybe aliens did it. You know, could be anything.
But certainly, you know, there's plenty of evidence that if there's a violent explosion or impact on another planet, that some of those rocks can be ejected into space. And you know, we've had rocks from Mars and land on Earth.
Yeah, and I think even like if I'm remembering the episode of Cosmos correctly, and admittedly it's been 5 to 10 years since I've seen it, but I think the suggestion was that perhaps they were frozen on a comet and then got to Earth, thawed out, and seeded from there. So they seem a little advanced to seed life.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not tardigrades specifically, but life. You know, it can survive in space under the proper conditions. Yeah.
Let's do the blue. Yep.
They're real tiny and all that. It's just amazing. But briefly comment on, have you ever heard of anyone keeping them as pets? It sounds like you might be easy to care for.
It kind of sounds like a sea monkey.
Yeah, they're like this, very much like sea monkeys.
But if
I have tardigrades here. No, really, I do. You can't see them, but I have them.
don't buy them, because you can just go out and collect them off a tree or you know, and bring it home and
You could
can
be-
read about it on you know, YouTube will show you how to do it. But
You could be a moss piglet farmer.
Alternatively, do buy them from my website, tardigradesforyou.com.
tardigrades, you know.
Tardigrades.
I'm from Boston, so it's hotty toddy.
Hotty toddy tardigrade.
You?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, tardigrades are, you know.
What's a rotifer?
I mean, they're a good example, but they're not unique. There are other animals in that same environment that display a lot of some of the characteristics of survivability that the tardigrades do. Rotifer is one of them, and some of the nematodes can survive, high levels of radiation, and that's not they didn't develop that because they're being exposed to gamma rays or anything, but it's just that the process of desiccating when they're drying out, that damages DNA. So they've developed these DNA repair mechanisms that will work if they get damaged by X-rays or gamma rays, whatever.
I'm sorry, I missed the end of that because you said gamma ray exposure, and I suddenly thought of like tardigrade hulks. What's a rotifer?
Well,
it's a little thing.
Okay.
It's a vertebrate?
Google knows all.
Can you bring that picture up here? So it's like it's like...
It kind of looks like a what do they call the
Horseshoe crab.
horseshoe crab?
Has anybody seen
like
the movie Godzilla vs. Destroyer? Yeah! It's one of those. It's the thing that Destroyer is.
Yeah, I mean, those things have been around forever.
So speaking of
not as cute as the tardigrade. That's the problem.
Speaking of rotifers, the study about the junk DNA, about the horizontal gene transfer, talked about how before the study where they thought that tardigrades had a bunch of horizontally transferred DNA, they thought rotifers actually have the most horizontally transferred DNA. And I read that and I was like, what's a rotifer? And I spaced out for a minute.
So I did a little, since this is a fan panel, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about tardigrades in popular culture. And according to Wikipedia, at least, the first mention of them in popular culture is in fact Cosmos: A Space Odyssey with Neil deGrasse Tyson in 2014. Also in 2014, the Adventure Game Studio released Tardigrades video game that features the creatures prominently in the storyline. In 2015, the sci-fi horror film Harbinger Down, the characters have to deal with deadly mutated tardigrades. Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp shrink themselves to enter the quantum realm, and they encounter tardigrades on the way. In Star Trek Discovery in 2017, the alien Ripper creature, who is used to navigate through a galactic mycelium network and instantly jump the ship from one location in the galaxy to another, is said to be a cousin of the tardigrade and is referred to as a giant space tardigrade. Spoilers.
That makes sense.
Okay, here come my two favorite, however. In the 2017 South Park episode, Moss Piglets involves a science experiment in which the tardigrades learn to dance to the music of Taylor Swift. And in 2018, the Family Guy episode Big Trouble in Little Quahog features Stewie and Brian being shrunk to microscopic level, during which they meet a group of friendly tardigrades or water bears who help them.
And then there's the song I played you guys at the beginning, which is about tardigrades.
I was just going to add that there's tardigrade-based aliens on Voltron. They're like 6 feet tall and very adorable.
How cute.
And in the Adventure Zone, when they shrink down in the elevator side quest, they encounter tardigrades that are, because they're shrunk down, giant monsters they have to fight.
Like you do.
I wonder how threatening a tardigrade would actually be.
Well, that's a good question.
If I was at their scale.
If you were at the size of them, if you were at their scale, how threatening would they be?
Well,
are they predators at all? What do they eat?
well, they
eat cell juices.
They
Right.
eat cells.
Delicious cell juices.
Or plant cells and things like that. They're not carnivores. They don't chase things. They don't hunt things. but that stylet that comes out is good enough to pierce, so they probably impale you.
I mean, if you can get through a plant cell wall, it can get through an animal cell wall.
You'd have to wear armor.
Yeah. Oh.
They'll eat other tardigrades. They'll eat the young.
So not only carnivorous, but in fact
And I've had
cannibalistic.
children, so I understand that.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks, Dad. Thank your father, kids.
Plant cells.
Right.
There's over 1,000 different species of tardigrades. So. They eat your dead skin cells. That's what.
Oh.
No, I don't.
How common is it? The mechanism of their growth, where they're born with the same number of cells, and they just hulk out to grow to adult size.
It's not unheard of in small, like some nematodes do the same thing. So it's not totally unheard of. It's just in larger animals, multicellular animals, it's not very common. But in the small microscopic ones, it's not unheard of. Certainly.
Let's have in the back corner.
Do you call like a large group of tardigrades, like a herd or?
Oh, so you're wondering what the group noun for tardigrades is?
Yeah.
I'll get back to you.
Is it a tardigrade?
A turd. See, that's why we have fans. A to Z, they're fun.
Oh yeah, are they social at all? Like, do they?
Well, you'll find them at high population densities just because of, if they find a good place. But I don't think they really run in packs. But you can get very high population densities in certain environments, certainly. And as you dry things, as they dry out, different species require different time frames to survive. Some species it takes 2 or 3 days for them to slowly make the adjustments to deal with the evaporation around them. Others, half hour to an hour, and they can survive. So it's a wide range, when you're talking about, not just one.
I'm sorry, I laughed because I was looking up your answer, and there isn't an official one. But according to the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe forums, there's a thread on them. And somebody was suggesting an endurance or a survival of tardigrades. But the one that came out, the one that made me laugh was a doctor of tardigrades. And at the very end, there's also a litter of moss piglets or a sleuth of water bears.
Was there one coming from over there?
I was wondering about this, like cryobios. So are there different ways they manage the insult to their environment? Different biotic ways of managing it, whether they're being desiccated or frozen or.
Yes, I mean it will turn on different genes. If things are drying up, they'll respond. If well, I guess it's along the same thing. As things dry up, the salt concentration will increase, so there's a lot of osmotic pressure on them, so they respond a little bit differently there. And cold, as they start to freeze, they have to. They basically will desiccate in all those situations, but the the prompting stimulus, they do it a little bit differently depending on what's stimulating them to desiccate and turn into a ton of tardigrades.
Or you could have a ton of ton.
How many tardigrades would it make to make a ton of tardigrades? Like a metric ton.
Well, metric ton, that's
They seem like they're very vulnerable, especially when they're in their desiccated state. Do they have any natural predators?
other tardigrades. I mean, when they're in that tongue, they're pretty resistant. So in that, it's almost like being freeze dried. They're very tiny amount of water. But I think we're going to get an answer to the. Yeah.
There we go. There we go. Cannibalistic tardigrades. A cabal of tardigrades?
Well, when they first hatch, they can be, a fraction of a millimeter. So they probably would be, some of those amoebas get pretty chunky.
We got like,
We've got some time.
we still got like 15 minutes left.
Everybody ready to put books in?
Oh, in the back.
So could we actually be a moss piglet farmer?
Well, sure. I mean, it'd be very easy. You just get some moss, and sprinkle water on it occasionally, and then you just have to harvest them.
You can harvest the cryoprotection.
Soylent Green is made of tardigrades.
Cares for their
Livestock?
livestock, and needs the same preservation. How are you going to protect the tardigrades
From other
dangerous amoebas?
Well, you have to start with a clean environment. So then you just introduce the tardigrades. So you would have an environment with moss and no other potential dangers there. And then you have to build a big wall around it to keep them
So
out.
could we irradiate the moss and then like
Yeah.
put it in there? Okay.
Let's say that my husband and I want to start keeping tardigrades as pets this summer.
Let's say.
What would be like the least expensive microscope that we would have to get to be able to look at them?
Well, you could probably get away with just a dissecting type scope. You don't need a real high-powered compound microscope. And a dissecting scope, you get a wider field, so you would probably, that would probably be fine.
They were discovered in the 1770s, so whatever kind of microscope they had then suffice.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you think about it, if they were discovered in 1773, you wouldn't need anything super complicated.
I got a microscope one time for Christmas that could plug into a computer, and it projects projects what you're looking at on the computer, and you can take pictures.
I bet you could just use the microscope attachments you can
Like
put
a
on a
Radio
cell
Shack
phone and do
thing.
it.
Then aren't there like YouTube channels where I can like live cam watch a bunch of tardigrades?
If there isn't, there.
I'll get back to you.
That would be a bad. We could probably get. We charge people $5 a month to come and they get to sit and watch our tardigrades. And you get a couple thousand people, and I retire.
Lots of business excellence.
Sell those.
Okay, so the first thing that came up, I typed in live tardigrade, and the first video that comes up is water bears in HD.
Nice.
Water bear tardigrades microscope fun, how to find a tardigrade, What makes tardigrades immortal? Real video of tardigrade / water bear. So apparently there's a market out there for live streaming tardigrades.
Oh, in the corner.
From the research that I did, which is minimal, but most of them seem to reproduce sexually, so there are male and female tardigrades, but there are some species that are female only and just parthenogenesis. So.
And most of them, the fertilization is outside the body. Actually, as the female sheds, they do shed their cuticle, so they molt as they get bigger. She'll lay her eggs right in the old cuticle, and then the male will fertilize.
That's
Beautiful.
It's like the old lady in the shoe.
waste not, want not. Oh yeah.
Well, they do have a protective cuticle.
Layer.
It's like well, it's like
Like a
cuticle.
skin that forms.
Yeah, insect or snake. They have to
Forms at a certain size, I imagine, and then they have to, as their cells grow bigger, they have to get rid of the small one and form a larger one.
They replace a small fraction of those cells. The ones that are, like the lining of the gut, that are, constantly being traumatized. They shed them, and they've shown that they will get some cell division in the gut. But the numbers aren't increasing. They're just replacing. What's that? Yes, it's just excreted. Yeah.
Kind of like hair.
Kind of like here, but it's like a keratin. Yeah, it's a protein. Yeah.
If you were to farm the carnivorous ones, how would you keep them?
Feed them plenty of.
Yeah, keep them well fed so they don't turn on.
Put up signs.
Put up signs.
No eating each other.
Keep them in individual cages.
Tiny muzzles.
Tardigrade not killed other tardigrade.
Tiny muscles.
The back.
They're very resistant to chemicals when they're in that dehydrated stage. So they probably would survive.
Thomas,
What you just said.
Thomas, you look horrified by that suggestion.
Oh, what? It's 9:20.
No, you just looked horrified by the suggestion of trying to kill tardigrades.
Oh no,
Probably.
What?
How does electricity kill? It stops your heart basically, or scrambles your nervous system, and
They don't really have them.
then when they're in that cryptobiotic state, they're not metabolizing. They're essentially dead. I mean, you can't tell them that they're alive until you add water, and then they just plump back up and they swim away. Yeah, so I don't think electricity would bother them.
Instant tardigrades. Just add water.
What was that? Yeah. Oh yeah.
They would have been hydrated. So.
Then it would be a room full of.
So I think what I took from the point that you just made was that there's not really anything in the tardigrade to electrocute, so probably wouldn't work.
In the bag with the blue.
So it sounds like cryonics, basically. Like
Yes,
all these tardigrades and
right.
But I think the thing that makes it work in tardigrades is that they're desiccated. There's no
Dried
water.
out.
The reason it doesn't work in humans is because the water freezes, expands, and destroys the cells, and then when we melt, we turn into mush. So.
these tardigrades are cryotics, or an example of cryotics that work.
Though it doesn't have to be cold necessarily, but yeah.
But they have taken that philosophy that they use when that desiccation and actually have applied it to vaccines. Vaccines that up until then were very labile. They had to be shipped and kept cold or frozen, and sending vaccines to countries that they don't have electricity. What they've done is instead of depending on freezing them, they've added some of these protectants, so now you can maintain the efficacy of the vaccine at room temperature. So they're smart.
So you in the maroon had a question.
Yes, and then you would they're vulnerable in that stage, except for some radiation. I mean, they have that DNA repair mechanism, and since their cells aren't dividing, they're not really susceptible. The cell has time to repair the DNA. Um, so they're very resistant to radiation while they're still hydrated and acting normally. But they're as susceptible as other animals to chemicals and things like that.
The far back corner?
We're assuming the average density rate that live in tardigrade would be about 2 times 10 to the 10 tardigrades.
Thank you so much. I can go on with the rest of my weekend in peace now.
Yeah, that was a good ending. That was a good ending.
All right. Well, so yeah, that's tardigrades.
I think that's it.
Do you guys have any closing statements of your own?
Well, I just look at it as life is pretty tough.
Okay, so instead of the kitten hanging on the branch that says, hang in there, it's a tardigrade up there instead.
Yeah.
Well, that's what mummies are.
Well, yes.
Yeah. I think the issue with either desiccation or cryogenics or any sort of way we have of preserving not the just about dead person until we can bring them back to life is the problem is bringing them back from that stored state.
Yeah, a lot of things happen to your proteins and other macromolecules in your cells as it desiccates. Your membrane, so unless you did it in such a way that you protected the integrity of those molecules, you'd add water and just have mush at the end. Well, exactly. I mean, they figured it out.
They're hoping. I mean, that's why they do the experiments with the proteins and stuff to see if maybe there's a way to bring it in.
And people just don't know how they do it, really. I mean, it's very poorly understood. At the molecular level, how they
It's not like
protect
the
it.
tardigrade comes back with the same personality that the tardigrade has, or the same memories. It's probably.
Well, we'd have to train them and then desiccate them. And
then
bring them
bring
back
back
to see
and
if they
see if
remember.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
Of course,
So
you'd have to have
that's your homework.
No, not homework, extended learning. That's your extended learning.
Oh.
Science teacher.
These tardigrades should be trained. The tardigrades
We're back to tardigrade, man.
Well, CRISPR is actually a bacterial or archaeal system. It's not a eukaryote. It's not a mammalian or eukaryotic system that we use as a and to repair. CRISPR really doesn't repair. It will identify a specific sequence of the DNA and play their little magic where you can remove or add or there's things that you can do to introduce DNA or to remove DNA from the sequence. So you can destroy a gene or add a gene, that type of thing, or fix a gene. But the repair mechanism in the tardigrade, they they put the DNA back together without making a lot of mistakes. Because if they made a lot of mistakes, you'd have a dead tardigrade.
And how much of that do you think is the fact that they just don't have that much DNA to repair?
Well, they have a few thousand genes.
Well, but there's also not that many cells.
They have 6,000
That's
genes.
right. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, there's not a lot of. They have time. That's when the cell is dividing, a lot
repeating
of stuff is
something
going on.
How many cells does a human have?
A few trillion.
Trillion. So repeating something 1,000 times, you're less likely to make typos than repeating it a trillion times.
So, fire.
Yeah. Anybody have suggestions for the tardigrade name? What? Bean? Anybody else? You second Bean? Do we have okay, so a vote, yays for Bean? Nays? The yays have it. The tardigrade is now named Bean.
All right, so that's about time. I'll play you guys out with the music again, and I hope you have a great Convergence.
I learned a lot. I hope you did too.
There is going to be a quiz in the morning, so I took notes.
Oh yeah, and if you're still around at 3:30 on Sunday afternoon, I'm on speculative astrophysics with Brother Guy. Please come.
Actually, right after this, I'm in the Halloween music panel.
Ooh.